Welcome back to a bit gamey and a little video on my alternate version of World War II. So the idea behind this is because I like early war, fall of France, like all the early tanks and all that jazz. But it's over too quick, and so going to have a little bit of alternate history to make it last a bit longer. This is not historical at all. This is purely entertainment for me. So I say that the root problem, or from my point of view, is that the initial German attack around Sedan was so successful, and then they could do the race to the Channel thing, and that it all happened so fast. The British had to evacuate. Half the French army got cut off, all that sort of jazz. So it was too successful. So I need some way to slow it down. And that's what this is all going to be about. Here's my superb little diagram. So the reason it was so successful is because a linear defence doesn't work against blitzkrieg, because the attacker can get local superiority wherever they want. So they break through, they get round the back, and they shoot off. Does the race to the Channel or the various equivalents. And so that's what went wrong, and it's what went wrong on the Eastern Front as well. Same thing happened. Less of a race to a Channel, but lots of breakthroughs followed by encirclement. So when the solution is this thing. It's defence in depth and more anti-tank weapons, basically. So when you have defence in depth, the attacker can might break through, first, second line, whatever it is. Like they did at Kursk. One of the German generals thought he'd broken through their defences, but it's only broken through the first two. So that's the first step. You have defence in depth to sort of slow them down. And then you have what I call, pack fronts, and mobile anti-tank guns in the reserve. It might be like tank destroyers, or it might be, 2-pounders on trucks, doesn't really matter. But basically it's mobile anti-tank. They can race to the point of the breakthrough and then set up a pack front, and that kind of also blunts the tip of the spear, and that's how it works. And then when you do that, then it develops into the kind of fighting that you had on the Eastern Front. On the Eastern Front, instead of having a blitzkrieg with breakthroughs, you just get salients instead. You couldn't get through the whole of the defences, and so you just get this protrusion into the defences, which then gets counterattacked, particularly at the edges or at the point of penetration, which leads to pockets. So the next stage after you get the initial salient, then it gets cut off at the join, and then you get a pocket where it's surrounded. And that's the kind of the story of the Eastern Front, is this constant to and fro of people making not only breakthroughs, but not total breakthroughs, creating salients, and then the salients get counterattacks, and then there's counterattacks on the counterattacks. It's all that jazz. So it's kind of like a much more mobile version of trench warfare. It's more mobile and much more sort of thick. Instead of you've got people on foot going for trench lines. You've got, tanks going for multiple trench lines. So that's what, France needed to do to withstand the initial attack. So in our alternate history, instead of having, what actually happened, coming through the Ardennes, breaking through and then racing to the Channel, instead we get something like this. That something had happened, which made the French start doing defence in depth, on the edge, before the attack happened. So it was still successful, but not as much. You had multiple defence lines, really just like having you had their reserve divisions around the Ardennes, just having little hedgehogs in villages and stuff, behind the front line. Because the reason for saying this is that in the actual fall of France, they did actually learn this. The French did actually learn this really quick. It only took a few weeks before they actually learned it. And in fighting in the south of France, they'd started doing that, where they, using infantry hedgehogs in villages and towns, with their armour as a mobile element, around those hedgehogs. So it only took them a few weeks. So I'm saying that for some reason something had happened beforehand, so that they were doing it from the beginning, not fully, not like in the Eastern Front with like miles and miles of dense minefields or anything, but just a bit more than they did have, so that the initial attack was slowed down, and held briefly, and then long enough for the forces that had moved into Belgium to come back out again. So it's a partial success rather than a total success for the Germans, I mean. And then the general pattern of after that first attack would be, the flank was turned, so they rushed back from Belgium and try and set up a second defence line along there, and then that gets turned well eventually, because the Germans have all the advantages because they had the right doctrine and air superiority for a time and all that. So that defence, but it's still the BF and the French first line divisions get back and hurriedly try and create a defence line along there, while the Germans are still fighting away through here, and then that gets turned, and then the second defence line along the Seine, and that eventually gets turned, and then the third defence line is the French going back towards the Loire, and the British getting pushed back into Normandy, and maybe Britain as well. And the reason for wanting that is for particularly wanting the BF to be pushed back to Normandy, so I can use all the maps people have done for the Normandy campaigns for scenarios, and just copy those maps, but have it the other way, have it the other direction, with the British are defending against the Germans advancing. So that's the pattern that I'm going for. I'm saying there's just some reason they started doing more defence in depth and more anti-tank weapons beforehand around the Ardennes breakthrough, so which slowed it down, which allowed them to get back and set up these, try and defend that. But by that time, obviously they lost, they lost a lot of stuff, and it was all hurried getting back from Belgium, etc. So the Germans still win. It just takes a lot longer. The thing I was thinking of as the event that sparked the whole defence in depth thing was thinking maybe have it in this alternate history that Britain and France landed some troops in Poland in 1939, and they got and the whole kind of fall of France thing happened there. They were basically set up some kind of linear defence somewhere in Poland, and it all went wrong. They got broken through and surrounded and in a pocket and all that jazz earlier. So they had they got pasted in Poland, and that experience made them realise they had to do something else. So yes, I'm saying that was the kind of inciting incident. That they landed some troops in Poland, and it all went wrong, and that's what led them to think about shifting to the defence in depth model, or more towards the defence in depth model. So yes, so that's the incident. I'm saying that was. I mean, it could be anything. It could just be that some general died earlier and a new general came along and said we need to do this. But for now, I'm saying it's a Poland thing. But it doesn't actually matter. The main reason is that they decided to change tactics sometime between 39 and 40, and it hadn't been completed or anything. They just started it, and so there were three aspects to the changes. One, having more defence in depth around the Ardennes. Two, having more anti-tank weapons at the small scale. So things like anti-tank rifles and some version of anti-tank grenades. Not as powerful as later. It's still weak, because I think the German tanks have got lots of Panzer 1s and Panzer 2. So it's not not spectacular. It's not like they've all got bazookas or anything. but just a little bit better on the kind of infantry company and infantry platoon scale. They've got a bit more anti-tank, and in particular the mobile anti-tank pack front idea. So they had a reserve. They've got more anti-tank weapons and mobile reserves, so they could seal off breakthroughs better. But still not great, but better than they had originally. And the sort of idea for the British would be like what they had in the desert, like 2-pounders on the back of trucks. It will be the sort of thing they had, So nothing too fancy. So just more anti-tank rifles per, like for example, having like 2 anti-tank rifles per platoon rather than just one. Some kind of fairly basic anti-tank grenades and 2-pounders on the back of trucks. And that way I'm going to have, basically have the sort of Eastern Front type fighting with all the salients and counterattacks and pockets and all that jazz on this kind of gradually retreating defence line. So basically, make the whole thing last longer, and it's just more fun for me as it goes, as it gradually push through. Yeah, so that's basically going to be it. That's my alternate history. More defence in depth, more anti-tank rifles, more mobile anti-tank guns as a pack front. So that's it basically. This may or may not make any sense to anybody else, but it was working for me. So that's that. Okay, toodle pip.